Hey everyone, welcome to Tech Bytes Takeover, as I like to call it, Between Two Geese. I'm Tyler Jurgens, Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager here at Veeam. Man, Matt, that is a long title. But I want to ask you guys before we jump into this, whether this is your first time joining or not, please drop a honk into chat and let us know where you're joining from. So, Matt, what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we got a full list today. We're going to talk about three things that you need to know about for MCP, two trends that Tyler has actually seen at some recent security shows, and that's because we've got one goose live on the ground right now at the Atlantic Security Con. And lastly, we're going to actually pull a story straight from the news that kind of ties us all together. So without further ado, let's actually talk about something that just kind of hit the news yesterday. So we've got this thing, if you're following along, anything AI related, you've probably heard of Claude AI. Now, it's one of the many sort of AI engines out there, but it's gaining a lot of popularity, particularly as it comes around to coding and whatnot. It's really, really strong there. Yesterday, they dropped this little bit tidbit of news here about a shift in what they are doing. So nothing's going away per se, but they announced this new Glasswing project. So Tyler, why don't you give us a high-level overview of what this actually is and why people should care?
Yeah, so what Anthropic here has done is they've released a new model that people can use to really get deeper insights into, security posture within the code. And what this does is they've learned over time that you can get some really good insights into different security vulnerabilities within your code by just using AI to read through the code base and find out what's going on, right? And there's a lot of different vulnerabilities that might be hiding in code. I mean, let's face it, no code is ever bug free. So when you're looking at it, you have to make sure you're taking modern approaches to the security basis and try to make and find the different vulnerabilities in the code. So what they've done is they've built this new AI model that is able to go through and detect the different vulnerabilities. And I know you had found this article here, Matt, and it's super fascinating. What did you like about it?
Yeah, so this was really, really interesting. And one of the things that I kind of took away right away after reading this is they cite some great examples here. Like, for example, they found this vulnerability that's existed for 27 years in OpenBSD, which is largely considered, a fairly secure platform. So it kind of puts a new spin on things. This vulnerability has been out there for almost 3 decades. It's been open sourced and nobody has found it. Yet this new, engine that they've put out, this new model that they've put out, has actually gone through and found this type of things. So it's actually kind of, call me paranoid, but it's a little bit scary in the sense of we're at this point where we can use AI to start finding all these vulnerabilities, and if you can find them, you can probably write exploits for them. Now, where does this sort of fall from the responsible disclosure standpoint, right? How do you actually put rules and regulations around this? That's really a question that I think has yet to still be answered. And Tyler, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on that, but just a quick shout out to our viewer in Romania. Thanks for joining. That's awesome. So, Tyler, like, what are your thoughts on how can this be governed? Should it be governed? How can it be responsibly, basically released into the public?
Well, and that's the thing I liked about how Anthropic has done this so far is it's currently a private release, and they've joined together with a bunch of different tech companies across the industry and given them some private access so they can take a look at their own code base and try to find a few of these vulnerabilities before anything is ever released to the public. And frankly, I like that. Like I like that there's a tool like this that is available to people, but it's not globally available, because let's face it, there's not always going to be the kind benevolent person out there that's going to be looking and trying to use this for responsible disclosure. So being able to release this here privately to companies like Google and Cisco, for them to go through their code base and find vulnerabilities or find exploits and patch them before they're ever available in the public, is a fantastic way to go. And I don't know what they're going to do in the future. Hopefully there's, more responsible disclosure there. But it's like you said, it's a little scary, but also pretty exciting to see that there's these tools out there that people can do not only on their own security review of their code base, but then kick it up a notch and throw some AI out there and try to find stuff that the average person won't see.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to address a comment we got on the YouTube stream here, talk about how Claude is amazing for helping with coding, and I fully agree. I'm always a little bit leery about AI isn't necessarily the solution to everything. But wow, you can do a lot with Claude right out of the box. Going back to the whole responsible disclosure, one of the things that Anthropic did with this is they realized kind of what they had here, right? And they reached out to some of the leaders in basically the tech industry, and they gave them a little bit of a sneak preview as far as here's a preview model with the intent of go through and start actually checking to make sure, are you as secure as you think you are? So does that kind of, make things better? I suppose. But at the end of the day, once something's been invented, it can't really be de-invented. So definitely something to watch on. I expect that we're going to be hearing about this a lot. And, it's kind of the next shift in the whole cybersecurity field. Now, I mean, speaking of cybersecurity, Tyler, you've been to a couple of events lately. I'd love to hear some thoughts and insights on what you've been seeing actually on the ground, on the show floor, talking to customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been to, RSAC down in San Francisco just a couple weeks ago, and I'm currently at the Atlantic Security Conference here in Halifax. Great conferences. I'm seeing a lot of different discussion around AI. So this is very topical here for what we're seeing here. But a lot of people talking about AI in their products, how AI is helping them do a lot of discussion and a lot of improvement to their product itself. And we're seeing a lot of, topics about using AI to protect against AI. And then as well, I've seen a lot of, still a lot of Veeam customers out there still working through, what to do with, their hypervisor stack on premises, because a lot of customers have been longtime VMware users, and VMware has shaken up their licensing model a bit, and that, can be very good for the different partners, and sometimes people need to shift and change. So there's still a lot of people up in the air, a lot of companies trying to figure out what is the next steps. Are they sticking with VMware? Are they going to a different partner? What are they going to do? And it's, if you're having those struggles out there, reach out. Maybe there's something we can do to help you out there and help you figure out what we can do and what we can help with.
So what I find interesting is that you're still having these conversations at places that aren't traditionally, let's say, hypervisor focused, VM focused, anything like that. And it kind of paints the picture of when you're looking at shifting hypervisors, you really kind of have to look at things holistically, right? It's nothing new, but this is another great example of, hey, maybe you've got the tooling to work with one platform. Can you actually take that tooling and switch to another platform? In a lot of cases, Veeam were able to do a lot of that. We are very hypervisor agnostic, and that list keeps growing what we support. But that spreads across all sorts of other domains as well, cybersecurity being one of them. Now, let's kind of take that and talk about the meat of this program here, right? MCP. You mentioned you saw a lot of AI at the various conferences that you've been at. It's definitely a hot ticket item, and MCP, right? What is it? Why don't you give us a quick rundown of what it is, and then we'll jump into what can you actually use it for when it comes to your Veeam environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we've got, when you're talking about MCP, as you can see from your screen there, MCP is really just about the different apps you use to talk to AI. So I like MCP. I always equivalent MCP to being a bit of middleware. It's a program that you can use that is vendor neutral, allows you to discover and call external tools and bring them together. So it's a standard out there that you can use to talk from, one AI model to another. And so what Veeam has done with that is we have released our version of MCP to talk to the Veeam intelligence itself within the various different building blocks itself. I know you've had a little bit of a chance to play around with it and what we've done with that, Matt. Is there anything there that you think people would find interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the neat thing about MCP is it's more or less open, right? It's not necessarily proprietary. In fact, the Veeam implementation you can actually download from the Veeam GitHub. And I bring that up because it really paints the picture of once you understand what it is, you're able to start building whether it's workflows, whether it's tasks, whether it's researching things. You're able to build these things and interconnect it between all of your systems. So why would you care, as a IT admin, as somebody working in an enterprise, as an IT director, really as any business person, why would you care? Well, it lets you start pulling information from all sorts of different sources. Maybe you've got a monitoring platform that you could tie into this. Maybe you've got your backup server that you could tie into this using Veeam. Maybe you've got, a servicing like, ServiceNow that you could tie into this. You could start building out workflows. When something happens over here, maybe pull this query over here and open the task over here. So there's lots of integrations available today, but this kind of opens a door a bit more to, letting you do your own thing. So, diving a little bit deeper into it, what is MCP? I know it kind of touched on that a little bit here, but this gets a little bit more in the weeds. So, Tyler, why don't you take us through this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's really just that vendor neutral protocol that you can use to talk to the different LLMs. But really, why it matters is when you're talking about integrations, there's always, you have program A that needs to integrate with program, C, D, and E. And then you also have program B that needs to integrate with A, C, and D. And you have all these different programs and the integrations together, and it can get pretty complex. And we've been dealing with that in IT for years. So having that open standard that allows you to talk between two different applications and two different programs and be able to pull information and drive that together really helps remove a lot of that ad hoc function calling and building specific plugins and trying to build specific integrations to tie everything together. And so that's why it gets pretty exciting when you start talking about what MCP can do. And I had a lot of fun. Honestly, I had a lot of fun building this in our lab because once I started unraveling what you can do with MCP, the possibilities just started clicking for me, right?
Yeah. And
Adding
we'll dive into that build out here momentarily. I just want to take a quick shout out. Thank you, Eddie, for the I love Veeam comment. Always love to hear that. But before we jump into what the build out looked like, I'd love to ask the audience, whatever platform you're watching on, have you been using MCP? Have you come up with anything interesting to use it for? What systems have you integrated? What problems have you solved? Or maybe what challenges are you hitting? I love to keep that conversation going. But let's shift gears back to this. So you were talking about building out in the lab, right? What are the components that we actually need to get this going in the Veeam environment?
Right. So with a very simple setup, you can do something with, your Veeam MCP server itself. You can get that from the GitHub. You can get, I use Claude Desktop. You can use a different AI LLM if you want. I like to use Claude, so I grab Claude. And then you can also use Docker Desktop. And so what will happen there is Docker will deploy that MCP server. Claude will do a various few function calls, and away you go. I went a little step further. I'm a bit of a purist when I build my infrastructure, so I like to have purpose-built setups for everything I do. So I did the generic Veeam MCP server. I use Claude Desktop, but then I only use Docker CLI on my jump box to be able to reach out to Docker running on a separate Ubuntu server to be able to spin up the Docker containers there. That allows a lot more scalability. Every time I build infrastructure, Matt, I've been building with scalability in mind. I've been doing this for years. So when I wanted to build this out in the lab, I was thinking, okay, how can I build this to make it so that we can scale up MCP anywhere? And then anybody else in our lab environment can start tying into that MCP server without having to use that same Docker jump box or with the, Claude desktop going on it and being able to run it right from there. So it gives a little more scalability, a little more flexibility to everybody out there wanting to use it.
Yeah.
Um,
So what I'm taking away from that is that you basically hand build artisanal Docker containers for your environment, and you treat each and every one like, it's a special child. They each have their own, strengths that they bring with it, and you treat them that way. So it's good to know that you give each Docker container you touch that sort of loving feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if we jump over, you can see there with that MCP server itself, it's really just a Docker installation on a bare bones Ubuntu server. There's nothing really special about how I built the Ubuntu. I'm sure many of you out there have done that today. And it's just going to the Docker website and saying, how do I install Docker on Ubuntu? Very straightforward setup. It's not going to take a lot of effort to get there. What I liked about when I started with this is, I started with Claude, I installed my Ubuntu, and I cloned from GitHub the Veeam MCP server. And then I started asking Claude. I'm like, all right, Claude, what do I need to do to get connected to the different settings and make sure that I'm able to call the MCP server when necessary? And Claude is actually really great at walking me through this. Now you have to create, there's a command within the Ubuntu server to open up the Docker to be able to be called remotely, because otherwise it's only local on that Ubuntu server. So get that port open and make sure that I can call it from my jump box running Claude Desktop.
Yeah. Now, something to note here, and we should have started off with this a little bit earlier, is yes, we're going to show you this in action, right? But we want to throw these slides up first because, well, this is something that's new to a lot of folks, and we want to make sure that you have the building blocks so that if you go back and you rewatch this, or maybe you're taking screenshots now, you actually understand the steps involved, and you'll see it's really not that complicated. So I know we got a question that came in about local LLMs. Tyler, do you want to take a stab at that? Maybe read out the question and the answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a question here. Can a local LLM be used instead of, or like such as Olama instead of Claude? And absolutely you can. So you can use your local LLMs. It's just going to be a different setup there on how you've got that LLM set up. And you'll want to use that to configure, whatever JSON file to talk to that MCP. But absolutely you can. And one of the things with the MCP setup we have is all the calls go across to Veeam Intelligence, and that is going to be processed by Veeam Intelligence. But some of the metadata, because we're using Claude today, some of the metadata will be sent up to the public Claude server. So you need to be aware of that if you're worrying about any kind of sovereignty or any kind of regulations. What we have may not fit your needs with our setup that we deployed in our lab, but you can work around that and deploy your local LLM to use all the processing locally. So it's a great way of keeping that sovereignty, but still getting a lot of that functionality you can get out of your AI models.
Yeah, and that's a great shout out about sovereignty. That's obviously a hot topic that's not going away because there's that aspect of, what data are you actually using? Where's that data residing? So great shout out there. Now, you talked about the Claude JSON config. I know this seems like a quick wall of text, but we thought that we'd include it to show, it really isn't that scary once you kind of understand what the different components are. So Tyler, why don't you actually walk us through, the various sections that we have here?
Absolutely. So what I've got here is I've got a couple different sections to set up for my MCP because, and I don't show every one of them here, but I've got it connected to our Windows-based Veeam Backup Replication, our Linux-based Veeam Software Appliance, as well as our Veeam ONE server. And you could also connect it to a Veeam Service Provider console system if you wanted. And you can create all this within a single JSON file, so you can use your one Claude Desktop to talk to all the different Veeam infrastructure you have. So if you've got one Veeam Backup Replication server or many, you can set this all up to connect. So I'll walk you through a little bit. You can see at the top, I'm running a Docker command. And what that essentially does is it reaches out to that host in that TCP line to say, hey, I know you're running Docker. Spin up a new Docker container with a few environment variables like the product name, web URL, the admin password and username, and self-sign cert. Now, this might not be the most secure way of doing it because I do pass a password across, but you can work with that and use different tools to make sure you're keeping your secrets a little more secured. For a lab environment, it worked just fine for what I wanted to do. And then it repeats later. You can see I've got another line there for Veeam ONE itself. So as many MCP servers as you want, you can configure there. And the best part about this is I made Claude do this for me. I'm not writing all this JSON by hand. My name's not Jason. I'm not going to write config files. So I just told Claude, I'm like, this is what I want to connect to. Build me a JSON. And it did it beautifully. It's a great tool for that.
Love it. It's kind of like, similar, a lot of folks know, so I have a 3D printer behind me. It kind of blew my mind when they realized I can actually print upgrades for the printer that's printing these things, right? So it's kind of neat to see Claude doing the same thing. You can actually use it to basically write code for you to interact with itself. So really, really cool there. Now we've also got, the architecture. So what does this actually look like architecturally once it's all built out?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of just a nice visual to show you what that looks like at scale. So I've got 3 different Veeam instances that I'm connecting to. I've got, like I said, my VBR server, my Veeam Software Appliance, as well as my Veeam ONE. And it just spawns different Docker CLI processes to talk and spin up the Docker containers and tear them down when it's done. They're all ephemeral, they don't stick around, but it also means you can scale quite a bit to get to where you want to go. If you wanted to have multiple different chat windows open, asking Claude and asking Veeam Intelligence all these different questions about your environment, it will spin up a new Docker container, run it through, and when you're done, it just destroys the container at the end. So it's never any kind of concern with scaling up or scaling down.
Now, let me ask you this. So you've got it all built out now. We've got the architecture. We're ready to get going. Do you need to be like a super special prompt specialist in order to get this going? Like, what's it look like to actually interact with it?
Great question. I'm glad you asked, because it can be a little daunting, right? You open up Claude and you're like, okay, now what do I do? So I built a nice sample prompt here, and I'll get to how I actually built this. But I started asking very simple questions. Hey, can I get to, a specific section of my RPO configured within my Veeam Software Appliance? And I asked, what backup jobs are protecting it? Is it configured with, within a 24-hour scheduled job, within a 4-hour, within a 6, all those different things I want. So I could see if my workloads that I'm being protected are matching the RPOs that I'm hoping they would protect. I wanted to see, restore points, all this different detail. I started actually really small. This prompt that you see here is quite elaborate. But what I ended up doing is I asked Claude, once I got to the point of having the information displayed that I wanted to get that. So it went through and gave me this sample prompt and came back and said, great, here you go. Here's a sample. Run it anytime you want. So now I can open a new chat window whenever I want, and it will generate the 3 results based off this prompt. So I can save the prompts and I can reuse them or tweak them if I need.
Yeah, I love that tip, and that's applicable to a lot of the different AI models out there. Is if you find yourself having a long form conversation and it took you a while to finally get to where you were trying to get to, it's always great to just say, hey, you know what? Write me a prompt that will actually just take me here next time if I need to start a new conversation. So you start to build up these prompt libraries, and the same thing is true for this, right? With MCP, Veeam Intelligence. Build up your prompt library. You might find that you're regularly going in there asking similar things, and you can tweak it over time. So we see the sample prompt. What does the output actually look like? You'll see it's actually pretty intuitive what you get back here, right? So why don't you walk us through this just quickly, and then we'll actually hop into the lab and see what it actually looks like in production.
Yeah, for sure, Matt, for sure. So what you see here on the sample output, I just did a couple quick screen grabs of it, and we can see more in the lab if you'd like. But that one prompt consolidate it, and spit out a bunch of different data for many different jobs I'm running. So right there, you can see that Active Directory job. I can see the expected RPO and the actual RPO of what I'm getting. So you can see we're beating our expected RPO there. I can see when my last restore point was, and I can see that the job returned an okay status. So we're all good there. That's what we want to see. If I ended up increasing the frequency of that job run, I would rerun this report. I expected to see a little more frequently there. And as well, you can see on the right side there, you can see different jobs I'm running to Vault and different jobs I'm running within my green zone DB. And that one's a little fascinating for me because there's some there that I'm expecting an RPO of 24 hours, but I'm actually achieving a 1.5 hour RPO. And what that really ultimately did is in our lab, we've got a few VMs that are in multiple jobs. So some VMs are achieving a greater RPO than what I was expecting because I'm running them in multiple jobs with a higher frequency. So because
Now,
pretty good insights.
absolutely. And, kind of putting my, solutions hat on, where this gets really interesting is, say you've got a compliance officer who's always asking you these things, right? Instead of going off and running these reports, what if you give them access to something like this? Make it more of a self-service type thing. Start bundling that in maybe with those other systems that we talked about, because MCP, you could use it across many different implementations. So it's really about also exposing this data in a controlled way, of course, to other people within your organization where it makes sense. Let them start asking the questions. And maybe it could start off as something simple as, why do we have, 12 backups? Or maybe it's more so, why are we spending so much on backup storage? And start digging into it. So you don't need to be a specialist in order to actually start digging into these things. So we'll jump into the lab here in a minute. But before we do that, Tyler, I think you actually had a question for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask, a little more of, what have you started seeing with MCP? Have you started playing around with it? Do you have any tips or tricks that you would like to share about it? Because when I started going through this, I really found a lot of fascinating things to do with MCP. Like I said, my gears were turning regularly when I'm going, okay, well, if I can get MCP with Veeam, I can probably get MCP with my other hypervisors as well. Maybe I can tie it into my Proxmox server or Nutanix or VMware and start looking at the different workloads I have running over in those other systems and seeing what I can do with Veeam to help increase my protection status, right? So you're not limited to just one system with Veeam here. The opportunities, and this is something Matt alluded to earlier, the opportunities really become endless on what you can dive in. So Matt, I see you got our lab up. Why don't you walk people through what you want to show them?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's our vCenter. Very straightforward. We've got the MCP server. That's the one that's running Ubuntu. You can see that we're connected here, right? We've got two tabs open. That's why I'm getting this warning up here. And at the bottom, we can see it's just running some Docker containers, right? Nothing super fancy here. Just got to feed it the right config files, set up those connections, and away you go. Now, the other component to it is, as Tyler mentioned, we like to kind of build purpose-built boxes. We've just got the Windows box here that we're running Claude Desktop on. So what does that actually look like? Well, here's Claude Desktop, right? Here it is running. It's very similar to the web UI if you've used that at all. But you can see some of the recent chats that we've had in here. So here's a great example of Tyler going through his journey, right? He started the conversation off up here, and you see it goes on for quite a while. We're getting some basic info, asking more questions, requesting more information, trying to get more fine-tuned. But then at the end, hey, give me one prompt that assumes I'll have the report show up, right? Like give me that nice, basically fine-tuned prompt that I start using going forward. And it starts spitting that out. So then if you take that prompt, you can actually start running it elsewhere. So for example, here's that prompt now going through the thinking process. and it's spitting out that report. So you're not going through that entire conversation again. You're not going through, hey, can you regenerate that last report the same way you did last time? Don't change anything. Rather, here's what my expectations are. Here's all the criteria. Please generate that. So once again, you start thinking about this from a broader view. What can you start doing with this? How's this basically, more valuable than just looking at one small area in your environment? You could connect multiple VBR servers to it, as we heard before, so you can really start getting a bit more of a global view of what's going on, especially if you got, let's say, lots of branch offices, remote offices, lots of information available. And then you could start dishing that information out, dishing out that access, but becomes much more of a business intelligence conversation as well. This is a whole nother piece of the puzzle that enterprises kind of need to start looking at. What can I actually know about my data, and how does that correlate to everything else, right? As we started at the top of the show, we talked about advancements in some of the new models coming out and basically how efficient they are. So in that case, we're talking, under the lens of cybersecurity, but start thinking about also from the business workflow perspective. If you're able to patch all these systems together, you can start asking questions like, how can I make my workflows more efficient? What are the biggest gaps in my workflows today? What should I be looking at that I'm not aware of? So yeah, like I said, super simple to actually start using. Tyler, thank you for putting all the hard work into actually getting it going into the lab. Hopefully those of you who are watching, you've gained some good information from this and some idea of basically what is actually involved with setting up an MCP server.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually a lot of fun. I was having a great time just setting it all up, figuring out all the little bits and bobs that you need to do to get into the MCP itself. And Heather asked a great question, like, can you download this as a PowerPoint as a different file? Absolutely, you can. You can just tell Claude, hey, I need to create this as a CSV file, or I need to create it in what kind of file format you want, and it will do that for you. But here we got a bit of an announcement, Matt. What's coming up? Tell the people about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can you find us, right? So mentioned top of the show, Tyler's actually at the Atlantic Security Conference in Halifax right now. So if you happen to be there, you're tuning in, make sure you stop by, see his session, talk to him at the booth, give him a honk, let him know that, you appreciate the work that he's doing. But we've also got Veeam ONE coming up. So we've got the online event May 12th. We've also got the event happening in New York City, May 12th. Go to veeamon.com, register, be the first to know. Both myself and Tyler are planning on being there. So, if you're watching and you're going to be at the event, make sure you swing by, find us. Let us know what you would love to hear more of on these types of shows. But yeah, we're going to be out and about, so be on the lookout.
Absolutely. It's going to be some great sessions there. And yeah, please, if you are by and we are around, come give us a honk. We'd love to talk to you. Let us know how things are going. But I think, Matt, I think that's all we have for time for everybody today. I wish I had more time to spend with you, but they don't let me honk around that much. So we're going to have to shut this down, but please see us next time on Tech Bytes Takeover next month. And until then, there are plenty of Tech Bytes episodes in between our Tech Bytes Takeover. So come check us out. Love to see you next time.
Thanks all. Appreciate it.